Hello, Oasis family. Here we are again for Contextual Discipleship. And as I promised, after the election, we were going to begin to get more and more getting into details of things that are more difficult to talk about and can be hot button issues. So we talked a couple weeks ago about policies versus politics. So we're going to narrow down some policies and talk about them. And this isn't going to be all the time where one side is right and one side is wrong. Oftentimes, there is a tension between the two. So today, I'm going to talk about war. And we're celebrating Veterans Day this week, and we are celebrating our veterans, those who have put their life on the line. And so just a real quick knowledge check. Memorial Day is celebrating those who gave the ultimate price. Veterans Day is just celebrating people who have served. So as a disclaimer, and I say it for two reasons, and that's this. I served. I was in the Army. I was an infantry soldier in the National Guard. Did a lot of things with it. I certainly loved it. I was thrilled to serve. I was honored to carry the flag in Normandy at the 50th anniversary of D-Day. I love our armed forces. My son is serving now. And, you know, I'm all for the military. But I can tell you there's a different thing that when you talk about that I start to get a little waffly about, and that is war. War itself is a policy, and it is a policy that we need to look at Scripture a little bit and think about it. So Ecclesiastes 3:8 says, there is a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. So it says there real clearly, there is a time for war and a time for peace. And so I think that that's fair. And so from a biblical perspective, we can say there's a time for war and a time for peace. Matthew 24:6-7 says, and you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. Jesus is talking about, the coming back, the return, that there will be a lead up in wars and rumors of wars. So there's wars then, but yet Ecclesiastes says there's a time for war and a time for peace. So we know that there's going to be an increase at some point, but what is our view of the policy of war? Interestingly, I think Jesus answers this to a degree. He says in Matthew 26:52, when responding to Peter, he says, put your sword back into its place. Remember, Jesus took his sword out and he was going to fight for Jesus, and he cut the guard's ear off. And he says, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. So when I served, when I was younger, many of you, I didn't really give much thought to giving my life. Didn't seem like a big thing. But then when we become parents and our kids serve, it becomes a little different. And so I began to look, and when Hunter, my son, went to basic training, he graduated on the same field I did, and I just began to think of, man, there is a real cost here. And the more I thought about it, the more I began to think as beside a policy and a politic, I'm like, what dictates where I would be okay to lose someone, and especially my son or daughter, to a war? And I had to go back, and I did, and I looked, and I'm just going to throw some statistics at you just generally. Under battle deaths up to 1991, not including Desert Storm, 651,000 died in wars in our country. Most of that took place in the Civil War, and then secondly, in World War II. Korea and Vietnam combined had under 100,000 deaths. So let's just look at that. World War II, we stood the ground. We did not want to go to war, but when it came to it, Japan bombed our fleet in Hawaii, and we began to be thrust into a war where Germany is coming on one side and Japan's on the other. And we responded because the war was coming to us. So, by and large, as a Christian, I wouldn't have any problem looking at that as something that is valid to lose my life or the life of someone I love to. But if I progressed in that and I went to Korea and I went to Vietnam, and then, you go to Desert Storm, Desert Shield, all those things, the Iraq War, all of that, by and large, those are areas that I wouldn't be a fan of losing my son to, losing my daughter to. And I don't know how you feel about that. That doesn't mean that I don't love the military and support them and that we shouldn't have a strong military, but I don't know that we should be nation building, because remember what Jesus said, put your sword back into its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. So those who are warmongering will find wars come at them. So my view of the policy is that we should be very guarded as Christians to what we support. Now, when I went to Russia before the fall of communism, I met a soldier who was in the Spetsnaz in Moscow, and he became a Christian, and then in their belief, in their Christian following, he no longer carried a rifle, and he drove a truck. And back then when I was young and I was in the military, I was just like, there's just no way. You're jumping out of airplanes, you're shooting artillery stuff, and now you step back and said, I don't want to be part in war, but I will drive the truck, because they sort of had to do something. But the older I've gotten, the little bit of that time, I respect it. And to be honest with you, let's contextualize it even further. In Easton, often, there's a group of people that are protesting war. And I can tell you that in the early days of seeing that, I looked at that with a bit of disdain. But now, I view it as that they are voicing a policy that they believe, and I know that some of them are Christians, that they don't think that we should be involved in wars. So there's a tension somewhere in there. I have one view, you might have another. If you would, shoot that view in there. Because I know some of you who are watching this have lost people who you served with. And it's hard. And it's hard to look and view that is, why do we do that? But let's be honest, we have to address this issue, because if we're going to be involved in the political realm, we need to hold both sides accountable to what we do and why, and we should be alarmed when we're called to go into war. It should be the last resort, because we don't want to perish by the sword. So we know that love requires sacrifice, and so share what you share lovingly, write something lovingly. You can disagree with me, I'm fine with that, but please please comment, please check the box on Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube if you're on there, and join the conversation. I hope you have a great week. Veterans, I love you and I'm thankful for your service. When it comes to Memorial Day, I shed a tear, I put the flag out, and I remember, and I'm thankful for the sacrifice that we live in a free country. Have a great day.